Scott has been analyzing marketing technology and its impact on marketing organizations for more than a year. He writes his chiefmartech.com blog and serves as a program chair of the Martech Conference Series. He serves as VP Platform Ecosystem at HubSpot, helping to grow and nurture the company's community of technology partners. And he's authored the best-selling book, Hacking Marketing, about adapting software management practices such as agile methodologies to marketing teams. Previously, he was a co-founder and CTO of IN Interactive. He holds a degree in computer science from Columbia University and Harvard University, and an MBA from MIT. Please welcome Scott Brinkus. Scott, all yours.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here with you. I feel like I'm in some sort of quantum state here where I'm both simultaneously here and in like a 12-hour time zone somewhere else. But all right, bear with me. So we're going to talk about platforms and ecosystems, and I want to start by really digging into an ecosystem that I've studied deeply for the past 10 years, and really take a look at some of the lessons from that, but then start to back out and see how that's actually applicable to so many different industries and sectors that we see in the world today. So about 10 years ago, I was working at this intersection of marketing and technology, and I came up with this map of all the marketing technologies I knew about at the time. It was around 150, which at the time seemed like an incredible amount, right? You know, tools for social media and online advertising, website management, email marketing, ton of stuff. This was the early marketing technology ecosystem. A year later, I did that exercise, and it had doubled in size to around 350 companies. 2 years later, it was 1,000. Now, people at this point in time were like, okay, this is crazy, right? I mean, 1,000 different marketing technologies. In fact, I wrote a blog post at the time. I was like, well, wait a second. What if this was the new normal? What if 1,000 marketing technology companies was the new normal? And most people said, no, that is not the new normal. And they were correct, because the next year it was 2,000. And then the year after that, more than 3,500. I mean, yeah, I know, it's impossible to read. Like, this is the chief marketing technologist from Clorox. He had to, like, print it out wall size, you know, to try to focus in on just some of these logos. Insane. And it kept going. We called the one for 2017 the MarTech 5000. Can you guess why? Yeah, okay. So 5,000. And then the next year, it was over 6,000. And you know, the funny thing is, I kept missing ones. You know, people were wondering, like, okay, is he just like, you know, changing the date on this? Is he trolling us? No, every year we kept doing this for real. But because I was based in Boston in the US, I had an inherently a North American bias towards what I was finding. So I had people all around the world start to send in landscapes of MarTech companies based from their country. Initially Canada, but then Finland. Do you know there were over 100 marketing technology companies based out of Finland alone? Germany, the UK, over 400. China, whole landscape of its own. Swedish MarTech landscape. I mean, I've come to believe now that, you know, marketing technology really should be an Olympic sport at this point. And by the way, I'm sure India would absolutely rule at this sport. So if any of you decide you want to come up with the map of the Indian marketing technologies, I would be delighted to see it. Last year, we did this version again. It was over 7,000 different marketing technology companies. And if you look at just this explosion, I mean, it was like 4,000% growth over a period of just about 8 years. This is crazy. But this is also what I would argue is what the shape of new cloud-based ecosystems is starting to look like. So we're used to this idea of markets having their peaks and consolidating, right? I mean, you know, you sort of just imagine business cycles, you know, every industry, you know, every innovation follows this pattern. And so most people have expected with marketing technology that was going to be the same thing, right? That it would, okay, yeah, sure, we'll have an explosion of technologies, but then there'll be a lot of consolidation, and it'll come back down to, I don't know, 5. Well, the thing is, the world has changed. And in software in particular, yes, there are these waves of expansion and consolidation, but it's almost like the whole thing is shifted on a 45-degree angle. Because what we're seeing is even like the peak of MarTech software at one point in time, it might consolidate, but then that consolidation is actually at the level that a previous peak was. It keeps rising. There's more and more software in the world, right? Mark Andreessen said, software is eating the world. I mean, essentially now, with cheap, bordering on almost free cloud computing, all this incredible open source technologies. I mean, it is possible for anyone, anywhere in the world, to create a state-of-the-art SaaS application and get it out there at enterprise quality. This is incredible. Now, it's not just a matter of supply, right? I mean, in order for all these MarTech companies to exist, they need buyers. But it turns out there's a lot of people buying this, too. This is data from the folks at Netscope who do cloud monitoring and security. They've studied, over the past few years, the average number of cloud-based services that a typical enterprise uses. And as of last year, it was up to 1,295. They broke this down by department category, and as you might imagine from all these crazy MarTech landscapes, marketing held the top position. So on average, an enterprise has 120 different marketing-related cloud services they're running. But here's the thing that's really wild, right? It's not just marketing. Like right behind them is HR. HR, with on average 100 different cloud services. Finance and accounting has 51. In fact, actually, it turns out there's doppelgangers of me in these other industries. Like there's someone who manages the accounting and finance technology landscape. This is just half of that landscape, actually. I couldn't fit it all on one slide. So this isn't unique to marketing. This is now what we're seeing in cloud-based applications, pretty much in every department throughout the company. All right, so what's going on here? Now, these are ecosystems, but they're not necessarily platforms. Now, there's a study by the folks at Ascend2, a market research firm, that found last year the #1 barrier that marketers were reporting to success with marketing technology was the lack of integration. They were getting all these incredible tools, but getting them to work together well was hard. Now, this seems actually a little bit odd because actually in the cloud, right, everything talks over APIs. In fact, actually, if you ask someone, does software A integrate with software B, the answer is almost always yes. Of course it is. There's some way you can do that. But what we're learning is, very quickly, not all integrations are created equal. And I want to walk you through a real quick model here of thinking about 4 layers of value to platforms within ecosystems. Because this is where all the difference gets made. So certainly there's data, right? And we can think of that as the foundational way of having 2 pieces of software, integrate with each other that can share data. But even that, you can have a wide range, right? You can have a piece of software that just lobs some data over the wall, and it's a one-way, call, and it doesn't know how things turn out on the other end. But then you can also have data integrations that are much more sophisticated 2-way syncs, right? That deals with exceptions, that deals with issue resolution. So we can kind of get our head around this and say, okay, I get, deeper and lighter data integrations. But then you also get into this question of workflow, right? As you've got all these different cloud services, you still want to be able to map these to processes both inside your company as well as customer journeys. And this then requires you to deal to triggers of events that happen in different applications that then impact reactions across other applications. So do you think about workflow across your collection of integrated apps? This is a question of UI, right? So I've got all these different applications. How many, on average, how many tabs do you have open in your browser at any given point in time? More than one, I suspect, right? You know, this is challenging, right? With all these different apps, people context switching back and forth. One of the things you start to see with platforms in these ecosystems is they start to share some common UI. So you can take the UI of an independent cloud service and start to embed it in a common platform where someone does the majority of their work day to day. The fourth layer isn't really a technology layer, but I think it's probably the most important, which is the idea when you have a platform that serves as the center of gravity for these integrations, very often they're in a position to bring some governance to the applications in that ecosystem. You know, they can certify that, yes, you know, this meets our requirements, you know, not just for how they handle API interactions, but things like, you know, do they support the proper, you know, regulations and compliance? Are they GDPR compliant, for instance? You know, we can run security reviews on them. We can do monitoring of SLAs. So when you start to see this explosion, as you now do in particularly B2B SaaS, of marketplaces, everybody has a platform, and now everybody has a marketplace. What they're really trying to get at is a way here of providing some layer of governance to assure customers that as these different pieces get plugged together from within that platform's ecosystem, they're actually going to work together. Now, I know this is a little bit of a nerdy diagram. My stock and trade is nerdy diagrams. So I'll simplify this with a metaphor. When you're thinking about integrations of different apps in a platform ecosystem, you can think of data as what we're working with as nouns, workflow as the verbs. What are we doing with this data? How do we orchestrate that? The UI and UX brings it to a common language, so we don't have this Tower of Babel user experience effect. And then governance is kind of like the grammar of that language to make sure these things are proper and correct. In marketing, people are completely going in this direction. I mean, this is some data from Gartner from earlier, about a few months ago. You know, the majority of marketers have now moved to this embracing the best-of-breed approach. You know, they don't believe one vendor is going to magically solve all the needs for them. They actually now consider integrations, better integrations, to be a competitive advantage. This is some data the folks at MarTech Today, colleagues of mine, did, that they asked why people switched marketing applications, why they substituted one vendor for another. A third of the time it was for better features. A third of the time it was to save on cost. Equally, though, a third of the time was because they wanted better and easier integrations. So now we come back to this crazy map, and we realize, okay, not all of these apps are equal. This is a long-tail distribution. And if you really dig into the companies there, you start to see there's a very small number of them that are truly taking over as core central platforms, bringing those 4 layers of data, workflow, UI, and governance to the stack. You then have category leaders that specialize in particular applications that might be $100 million, multi-$100 million companies on their own, but they're largely based on value plugging into these platforms. But then you also get thousands of these small specialist companies. Arguably, even individual customers are now building their own apps and their own extensions. So tens of thousands of ecosystems and citizen apps. And so this brings me to my closing from the MarTech side, which is I feel in this past year or two, we hit an inflection point where we switched from what I called the first golden age of MarTech, which was that 10-year explosion of all these different marketing technologies, to the second golden age. The 3 things that make the difference there is in the first golden age, it was that battle between suite versus best of breed. Do I get it all from one company, or do I have to, I'm sure I can get the best of everything, but I have to figure out how it all works together. We're going past that now. We're getting to this idea of both, that I'm going to have these platform ecosystems based around major suites, but then they're going to allow people to extend them with these best of breed specializations. In the first golden age, there's this dichotomy between software and services. Are you a software company or are you a services company? Now at this point, we've got software companies that are offering services because the technology has gotten so sophisticated, they need to teach people how to take advantage of it. You've got services companies that are now building their own commercial applications as well too, because they're able to bottle their expertise and their knowledge and plug these things into those platform ecosystems. And then we used to have this dichotomy between build versus buy. Do I get a commercial app or do I build something from scratch? But now companies are taking advantage of these platform ecosystems to start with a commercial foundation and then extend them with the things that are specialized to their business. And what I would leave you with is, I've walked you through what's been happening in ecosystems and platform ecosystems and MarTech. But this is nothing unique about marketing. This is the state of cloud software, cloud-based ecosystems, cloud-based platform ecosystems. And this pattern of long tails that we see in the marketing space, we're now starting to see across HR, we're seeing it in sales, we're seeing it in fintech. And there's a tremendous opportunity for companies at all points along this curve. Never been a more exciting time to be working in marketing, never been a more exciting time to be working in platform ecosystems. Thank you.
Let me offer Scott a chair, and let me offer you folks strictly 2 questions. We're running against time, and we have a third speaker. So can we have the first of the 2 questions from the audience?
I scared them with too many logos.
No, you're absolutely fine. Takes a little time for folks to warm up. Questions? Number 1 or 2? There's a question right there.
So the question, Brian, is the platform ecosystem going to create winner-take-all kind of a scenario where bulk of the success goes to the platform? So how is that augur for the market in general?
Scott,
That's a great question. So by default, that was the assumption, that if you looked at a very narrow segment, you could say, well, whoever becomes the dominant platform within that category, that is a winner-take-all, because once people integrate to that platform, right, they're not going to go and integrate with a bunch of other platforms. It turns out, though, that in the cloud-based world, interfacing to other platforms isn't that difficult. These things actually start to share a lot of the same API patterns. So, for instance, it is not unusual to have in MarTech, I know, a app provider that integrates to Salesforce, and integrates to Marketo, and integrates to Eloqua, and integrates to HubSpot. All of them. In fact, actually, what's fascinating is you even see the major platforms now integrate with each other, too. Right? How many people do you know that use Marketo and Salesforce, and Adobe together? Right? It's actually very common to see these things come together. And so what I think you're seeing is, yes, there is some strong winner-take-all dynamics, but something about the open nature of how things communicate through the cloud is tempering that in ways that make it a little bit strategically difficult to just say, okay, this is an open-shut, winner-take-all strategic scenario.
Okay.
Do we have another question? There's a question there. I think we've got 2 questions there. Let's take one of those, please.
Hi. I've been a user of MarTech Suite from about 8-10 years now. Biggest challenge what I face, and I believe a lot of MarTech users who are basically SaaS-based, are on terms of once you get onto the platform, you build your data history and a journey onto that, it becomes extremely tough to move between one platform to another. So for example, from moving out of a HubSpot to an Eloqua or a Marketo or something else becomes damn challenging. Do you see that in any ways being easier for a user to migrate in and out whenever they want?
Yeah, it's a great question. So if we think about the different layers of that integration stack, data used to be one that was considered like a lock-in, right? Like, oh, well, I've got all my data formatted in this particular platform, so there's no way I can get that out. But actually now today, with things like these integration platform as a service tools, the data itself has become very fungible across these different platforms. There's in MarTech, there's this rise of a new category called customer data platforms, CDPs, and their whole value prop was to just make it incredibly easy for you to pull in data from anywhere, but just as easily push data out to anywhere. The CDP does not lock the data. Now I think as you go higher up the stack and you talk about, okay, specific workflow, designs and automations, as you think about things like UI and UX, okay, you now start to get into things that are a little bit more specialized to particular platforms. But I think there's opportunity in the next 10 years for us to also see standards start to appear in those domains as well, too. So yeah, it's definitely a lot of work to move from one major platform to another, but I think the direction the industry seems to be going is it's getting easier, not harder.
We might be able to slide in that third question. There was a question right there. Third and final for the session, please.
Scott, you touched upon the economics of the ecosystem model, but what should a player focus on, right? And what is the economic model behind an ecosystem play, whether in MarTech or even in HR or any other ecosystem plays, right? What I mean is, if you are a business, right, whether you should be an ecosystem builder, whether you should participate, what type of IP are you giving away when you participate in a system like this, including data, including the revenue model?
Yeah, an excellent question. So I think this comes down to two strategic decisions. And if we think about that long tail view, there's like a long tail in almost every single segment or subcategory of MarTech these days. So first is like, well, which category or subcategory are you going to focus in? And then the second is, where does your business sit along that long tail? Now, again, for a lot of businesses, particularly VC-funded businesses, it's all about, well, we've got to be one of the dominant platforms. It's either that or bust. But the truth is, there is a lot of money to be made further down that long tail. I mean, like a great example, like Accenture. I hear rumor that Accenture makes a lot of money in Salesforce's ecosystem, right? They do not own the Salesforce platform, they make a tremendous amount of money further down on that curve of servicing people within that platform ecosystem. And so I think as we see more and more of these platform ecosystems emerge, you don't necessarily have to own the ecosystem to be able to make it an incredible business opportunity.
Great, thank you, Scott. I'm going to request you to stay on stage while I introduce our third speaker for the morning session, Conde, and let me quickly introduce him. Dheeraj is the co-founder, CEO, and chairman of Nutanix. He brings a wealth of experience of working at high-growth enterprise software companies. Prior to founding Nutanix, Dheeraj was the VP of engineering at Astrodata, which is now Teradata. He's also co-authored numerous patents in the area of distributed databases. Dheeraj's entrepreneurial spirit has been recognized with a number of prestigious awards, including Dell's Founders 50 and the E&Y Entrepreneur of the Year, Silicon Valley. Dheeraj is a PhD dropout from the University of Texas, Austin, where he was a graduate fellow of computer science. He holds a BS in computer science from IIT Kanpur, where he was adjudged the best all-rounder student among all graduating students across all disciplines. And he was bestowed with the Distinguished Alumnus Award. Dheeraj is also on the board at Adobe Incorporated. Dheeraj, all yours and welcome.
Thank you, Sudhir. Really appreciate it.
Glad to have you.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for being here. I know there's only two things in life that we can invest. One is time and one is money. And I know what you're investing with us here is more precious than money. So thank you. Thank you for really being here. I know we're a little bit biased towards this side, and then there's the center is, I'm wondering if the whole world is going socialist, like left first and then right, actually. And I'm going to move here. And my act is a little bit simple. I don't have any decks, no slides, but I think I want to explain ecosystem from a human psychology point of view. And I think it's much easier than quantum, I can tell you that. 9:30, trying to ground and explain quantum versus trying to explain ecosystem from history point of view, from trade point of view, and from human psychology point of view. And the reason why I do this is because the more I become a better business person every day, the more I have to really force myself to think about history and humanism and psychology, more so than technology and bits and bytes, and a lot of those things that actually matter, but what matters more is thinking about the ecosystem, customers, partners, and employees too, actually, which is an equally important part of the Main Street ecosystem. But before I talk about hyper-convergence, which is, by the way, yet another physics-like term that nobody knows what it means. It's like quantum mechanics. And I'm probably going to have to use a beginner's mindset to explain what hyper-convergence is. But I'm going to steal from Brian, who basically talked about what Apple is. It's really at the cusp of computer science and liberal arts. And what we've done with hyperconvergence, even though we didn't give it the term, analysts gave it the term, it really is at the cusp of computer science and liberal arts. Because we're trying to take something really profound. It's hardware-centric, infrastructure, things that really need to work on top of infrastructure is everything. So the burden of proof and responsibility of making bits and bytes work and be reliable, I think computer science brings reliability to hyperconvergence, and then liberal arts brings simplicity. So how do you make it really, really simple? But before I talk about that, I think there's a question of why. Like, why do ecosystems matter, right? And to that, I go back and look at, the history of nations. Again, if you think about what has happened in the last maybe 20 years is we overdid globalization. And finally, in the last 2-3 years, there's a backlash against globalization. And this is a classic paradox between going broad, which is a community of nations, and how do you really work with each other? It's an ecosystem of nations. And going deep, which is within my nation, how do I do such that the local people actually get more? The have-nots really also become a part of a global world. And especially in the last 2 years, I would say there's been a massive tussle between east-west of going broad versus north-south of going deep within the nation itself. And I think this will continue in the world of ecosystems. We belong to a community of nations. I'm very close to Condoleezza Rice and Bob Gates, and I learned a lot from them about building a company, building a business. And Condi has something really unique to say. It's like, well, I know you guys are competing with some of your partners, and you're cooperating, and you're competing at the same time. And this paradox has continued forever in the community of nations. All you can look for is overlaps of interest, and really ignore the conflicts of interest. And the more you can increase the surface area of the overlap of interest, the less you'll think of your partner as a competitor, and the more you'll really try to build businesses together. So I think this east-west conflict with north-south, and how deep do you go as a nation, which is your own stack, versus how do you really build these integration things across different stacks, is here to stay. And I think that's what we tussle with on an everyday basis, because it's either about me or it's about us. And this goes everyday basis. You need to make decisions about what does it mean to really think about the ecosystem at all. In fact, the psychology of ecosystems, and I've come to really relate to this a lot in the last 10 years of building Nutanix, is the more you give, the more you get. And it's a really simple way of thinking about ecosystems. The more you give, the more you get. There's a great book I read almost 2 years ago, and I would recommend all of you actually read the book as well. It's called Modern Monopolies. Now, it's somewhat of a negative word, monopolies, but Modern Monopolies talks about network effects. And network effects basically is about your ecosystem, is how do you really bring suppliers and consumers on your platform, where the more you give to these folks, the more you get back as making a more robust platform. And there's a lot of history about this. The more you give, the more you get. If you go back to Apple in the 80s and how they were building vertically integrated stacks, there was a market for PCs, and people thought PC was a done deal. The market was done, and Apple was king. And then here comes another company, a little company that was really trying to hustle with another relatively, I would say, spent force called Intel. Intel had basically gotten beaten up in the world of memory, and the Japanese almost killed them, in 1985, 86. And they were also a hustling company, young company, little company in 1990. And Microsoft had been denied any kind of integration work with a larger company called MIPS. And here is a small company called Intel and a small company called Microsoft. And they said they'll redefine PCs by really thinking about ecosystems. And the way they thought about it is to say, look, PC is about software. And if we actually give out the software to all the PC manufacturers, they make money on our software, and that's how we make money. So the more they gave, the more they got back. And the market became 10 times larger, right? PCs eventually, Windows became 10 times larger than Apple because it was not a vertically integrated stack, but a horizontally integrated stack, right? If you fast forward 10 more years, there was another large incumbent called Walmart, and Walmart is obviously the king of commerce, vertically integrated company. Everything, the suppliers had no access to front office to really go sell directly to the end users, but it was not a platform. Everything happened in Bentonville, and the suppliers had to come and negotiate in the back office, but the suppliers had no access to the front office. And here comes a company and says, you know what, the only way to compete with Walmart is with an ecosystem. It's a flotilla of 2 million partners that created Amazon, the retailer. Said, look, we cannot be vertically integrated. We've got to really open up the back office folks and their warehouse to the front office that I build. And I build an operating system. And that software is billing and payments and identity and logistics and recommendation. And if I deliver billings, payments, identity, recommendations, and logistics, then these 2 million partners will make me big. And that's what happened. There was an ecosystem of millions of partners who came and really created this flotilla that went against this massive monolith called Walmart itself. Fast forward 5 more years, and the exact same thing happened with Android versus iOS. Apple came in and defined what a smartphone was, and did a really good job, not just bringing the music industry with iTunes and really changing the way you think about consuming music, but then they created the App Store. There was network effects of developers making money. Apple keeps 30%, developers take 70%. So the more they gave, the more they got back from the developers themselves. But I think Google took it one step further, saying, look, it cannot be a vertically integrated stack. We got to open this up. And smartphone is really about software. So you open up the software to handset manufacturers, the market becomes 10 times larger. So I think if you see, there's a whole paradox about ecosystems that is really hard to explain. The more you give, the more you get. The more margins you share with your partners, the more money you actually make. And that is the essence of ecosystems, which brings me to the world of cloud. Right now, cloud is vertically integrated. Everybody's coming and chest thumping about their stack. It's my stack or no one else's stack. And I think history has seen that only goes so far. I mean, if you go back to hardware manufacturers, Unix vendors back in the 80s, it was all about their stack. And in fact, if anything, Microsoft was the first company that said, look, it's my software on Intel's hardware. And by the way, there's multiple server manufacturers who make the hardware, and you can actually buy it small, and you can buy it from anybody. So there was enough diversity that really helped Microsoft become an operating system company. But then they started to really fall into the trap of success, and they said, it's my stack. It's Windows, it's Active Directory, it's Win32 APIs, on and on. But here comes HTML, and the browser and client server really starts to look bad because the ecosystem around the browser basically became the antithesis to Microsoft itself. Now, for 10 years, they actually were all about their stack, and then comes Satya and said, guys, it's not about our stack. In fact, there's a really good article that came out in 2015 when Satya came on board in The Economist, and I think all of you should actually Google for it. It's called Building Things That People Like. And if you Google for building things that people like, you'll see how the baton is passing from Bill Gates to Steve Ballmer to Satya. And for the first time that I actually saw an expletive being used in The Economist. It actually literally says, what was Satya's strategy? Fuck Windows. That was his strategy. And it's on The Economist. So the reason why I'm using the F word is because I got some poetic license from Economist to use it here, so pardon my French. But that's the essence of ecosystems. It's highly contrarian. The reason why Microsoft is relevant today is because they went against the full stack. They said, we've been asking our customers to pay a tax, a strategy tax of Windows and Windows alone, and everything else was over my dead body. Linux was something that if you use the word Linux at Redmond, you probably would not have a career in Redmond. In fact, the same thing, iPhones were banned before Satya came to Microsoft, within the Microsoft campus. And you can see the resurgence of a company. In fact, the article talks about Microsoft at 40. And Microsoft at 40 was a new company because they really thought hard about ecosystems. And the fact that they became vulnerable one more time, they said, look, it's not about us, it's about them. And the more we do for them, the more we'll actually make money. And which is why they gave up on Windows Phone, said, look, the way to become a platform company is to be ubiquitous. If Microsoft Office can run on Apple, that's a great place to be. In fact, we build things that people like. It's the apps. And it's the apps strategy that really made Microsoft relevant, even though they didn't own the phone. I think, and that's the beauty of ecosystems itself. And that's the way we've been thinking about this, that ecosystems is really about customer success. So the moment you use the word customer success, it makes you think more outside in rather than inside out, actually. And ecosystems is about curiosity. And I say this a lot because product management is a really hard role, by the way, and most people don't know how to really make a great product management function possible. But the word is simple, it's curiosity. It's the day in the life of. It's a week in the life of. It's a month in the life of. Of who? Of the people who actually use your systems, your products. They're not just living your stack. They're living some best-of-breed things, and you got to really go and integrate with all these things around you. And that's ecosystem. That's what makes you into your platform. That is basically at the core of ecosystem itself. Platforms and apps are two things that are two sides of the same coin. And most companies fail because they're self-proclaimed platform companies. They're like, no, we are a platform company. And the real platform companies never use the word platform. I've never heard Apple say they're a platform company. They are a platform company. In fact, gone are the days when Microsoft would assert that they're a platform company. They're like, well, we're just a company that is trying to figure out. If they're not number one in cloud, they're trying to figure out how to be more relevant for the customers and think about customer success. And that is the word hyper-convergence, which is, by the way, another quantum mechanics word, as I said before. It doesn't mean anything. Actually, in fact, I hate the word hyper-convergence. And we're still a part of Magic Quadrant. We're the leader in that Magic Quadrant. I'm like, what does it even mean? And it's technologists, we actually go and introduce these new terms. But in reality, it's just infrastructure as code. Infrastructure is code. And now you're really at the mercy of the silicon that's running underneath you, and that's actually anybody's server. And in this case, as we moved from being an appliance company to a software company to a subscription company, we had to give more to get more. Think about it. We gave our top line on appliances. We gave our hardware top line revenue as being a public company. Doing all that is hard. Going from that to software and from software to subscription, we had to change the wings of the plane of a business model, and it was all tied to ecosystems. We had to grow the surface area of our software, and the only way to do that is to let it unleash itself on someone else's hardware. That is the power of ecosystem. We're doing this exact same thing with the public cloud hyperscalers now. We want to run on their hardware. They're opening up bare metal servers as a service, servers as a service. And I think we have a unique advantage to really make infrastructure as code run on both sides of the aisle. So we don't have to take a side on my hardware and my operating system. In fact, people always look at us and say, well, it's a zero-sum game between you and VMware. I'm like, it's not. We are two companies that really need to figure out how to work with each other like this. Sometimes we work on top of them. In fact, 60% of our customers use us as an app. We've made infrastructure into app on top of VMware, the platform. and yet other times we actually are the platform because we have the whole stack. So I think, this whole thing about what is a platform, what's an app, it's really an inside-out looking view. I mean, who's to say that WeChat is an app? I think WeChat is a platform. Who says Facebook is an app? Facebook is a platform. Yes, you don't own the underlying Windows phone or the Android phone or the iOS operating system, but once you get inside Facebook, you're enamored. It's just basically the engagement that you have with Facebook or WhatsApp or WeChat, that's what a platform really is. So I think, in our world, we're really trying to figure out what it means to be a part of an ecosystem. Many a time, we have to really assert as a nation that, we have great reliability because it's our stack. But many a time, we are kept honest by the market forces to say, you've got to behave and really be in this community of nations. And I think as a business person, the more I learn about this, I go back to the humanism of business, which is the more you give, the more you get. So with that, thank you, folks, on really giving me this opportunity. Sudhir?
Really fascinating insights into what Dheeraj talked about. Folks, we're on time. Dheeraj is going to be here, so Scott, and I'm sure you'll find Brian somewhere out here. So we're going to call it a wrap. We made it successfully. 3 speakers, outstanding speakers, fascinating insights. Can we hear it once again for Brian, for Scott, who are with us right now?
Thank you so much, Sudhir. I'm going to request you to hand over tokens of our appreciation to both of our speakers.